that's a great question to start the conversation with, because that's really centrally been my lifelong question, which is how to write a history of figures or times for which ostensibly records don't exist. And I use the word ostensibly with great care and with great emphasis. So just a couple of things. Sometimes records actually don't exist, right? I mean, there are certain kinds of records I would love to have. I mean, I'd love to have records in which men and women are talking about deep emotions, exactly the kind of events I want to see. What happens, to give you one example, Gulbadan Bano Begum, with who I essentially launched my love for the Mughals and my whole career. She's the only woman historian of the empire, the only woman who wrote a prose chronicle of the Mughal times, of her forefathers, but not only from the Mughals, also from the entire world of 16th century Islamic empires. And I say this because women classically wrote poetry. We can get into that later on, why those choices, etc. But her memoir was known to have existed, right? After 83 folios, the memoir still sits as this gorgeous red book in the British Library. It breaks off after 83 folios. And I have, since writing that first book, Domesticity and Power, wondered about that gap, right? I would love, as I was saying, to find out exactly what she was writing in those folios, why those folios were, I want to now say removed, because I'm writing this biography and I have pretty good sense of what happened. So I say this just in the interest of saying there are actual wishes and desires a historian always has. But in the cases of absence or gaps or voids, lacuna, as I've been calling about that gap, there are particular ways to approach the archive. And one way, ways in which I've been doing it since I wrote more in a trade mode, and again, we can talk about that, exactly what that departure in Empress means, is to really think about context. Now, context is not a backdrop. Context is actually narrative itself. Context requires a lot of thinking, a lot of learning, a lot of learning about the times, the broader parameters, right? So that's one way to approach it. Then there's a second aspect to this whole idea that records don't exist, which is, in an earlier conversation with you for Karman, I had said that there's this whole issue of disbelief, right? Even when documents are there in front of you, you somehow want to believe that, this does not exist. And let me get more clear about this. So for instance, historians knew about Gulbadan's memoir. It's a very unusual memoir in that, and I say this memoir now after having called it chronicle, because it's actually very difficult to classify her work, right? She breaks from all sorts of traditions. Whether she does it decisively, intentionally or unintentionally, we'll never know. But she really ends up producing this very unusual document. And historians, I think, did not know what to do with it. It's written in colloquial style. It is one great translator of the Mughal documents says that she messes up her dates. Well, actually, the problem is not that she messes up her dates. The problem is that she's writing in a stream of consciousness style, which means that when she is documenting episodes, she is writing about them as she's hearing it, discussing it, working it out with other people in the haram. And so she's not sitting there, she's essentially writing this as a contribution towards the great imperial history, the Akbarnama. So she's not sitting there thinking about you and me, maybe she was, which would be wonderful. And then she has to then sit down and clarify and say, well, You folks at the Al Singh College and Ruby, you know, when I was writing this, this is exactly what was going on. This was the date when it was happening. No, it's a stream of consciousness style. It is up to the historian really to work out, you know, that's the task we are trained for, to work out, well, what was really going on? What is the layer of activity around this time, right? So there are all these issues about working with things. It's a history writing is a kind of, whether we like it or not, it's a kind of spy work. It's a kind of imagination and you know, dealing with texts in a whole landscape, in a whole milieu, if you will, right? Working out personalities, dealing with different kinds of not just textual traditions. I've been working very closely with painterly traditions that have their own, you know, issues and problems and you know, how to think, how to learn. So we have to learn all these things. So the so-called problem of absence is a very interesting problem, and one that I've been at, and one that I can talk about nonstop.